Welcome back to our panel discussion, Zero Trust in the Era of Endpoints, sponsored by Tanium here on Federal News Network. My guests today are Nick Ward, Chief Information Security Officer at the Justice Department, Jerry Caron III, CIO and Assistant Inspector General for IT in the Office of Inspector General at Health and Human Services. Don Watson is the Chief Information Security Officer for the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Vijay D'Souza, Director of IT and Cybersecurity Issues for the U.S. GAO, and Matthew Marsden, Vice President and Technical Account Manager for Federal at Tanium. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. And there's a piece of infrastructure that we did not quite get into in depth, and devices, infrastructure, security, visibility, they're all tied into one really system of problems here and challenges. But the piece of architecture that has become so crucial in the last year and a half of the pandemic and remote working is that infrastructure to which devices immediately connect, and that is the user's ISP. And with people working at home, you've got this huge variety of types of ISPs, types of connectivity, that, and also different versions within a given brand. And so how do you deal with that? How do you look at it? How do you consider that as part of the cybersecurity and device data protection complex? Nick, we'll start with you again.
All right. Yeah. I mean, we don't control those networks, right? We don't control a person's home network or the Starbucks network, wherever they happen to be. And so we have to assume some things, right? Like if your teenage kids are using their phone to download any random apps and things like that, they could have really malicious things on there. And so we assume that those networks are compromised, and that's how we have to treat it. We don't control those networks, and Zero Trust actually is a pretty elegant solution for us. As Matthew had mentioned before, we've got to take in, Matthew and Jerry actually both mentioned this, is that dynamic evaluation of the environment has to be part of authorization into our data. So what we're looking at is, we need to know the real-time security posture of the device. Is it being attacked? Is it potentially compromised? And we can make pretty dynamic decisions based on even location of the device. But like, even when they're accessing one of our applications, we may have sensitive components of that application and less sensitive components. And we can even make decisions based on if the device if there's indications that there could be some security risks going on, maybe we'll let you do something like submit your time card, but we're not going to let you have administrative access to highly sensitive data. So those are some of the things that we're looking at, is using Zero Trust to be able to do that dynamic evaluation in real time.
So that solves the long known problem of Starbucks, so to speak.
Yeah.
That is, people that want to work not from anywhere, but in particular, but wherever there might be an open Wi-Fi network, airports and so on. That's been a big bugaboo, but the Zero Trust seems to get at that issue then.
Exactly. Like, I mean, true to its name, Zero Trust. If I treat Starbucks with the same trust level as I do my own network, and meanings that I don't trust any network, then I can implement those things. I go into it with my eyes wide open, saying, I don't trust any network, therefore I can allow devices to operate on these less secure networks.
We'll go to Jerry. Comment on that.
Nick did a pretty good job of wrapping it up. It's definitely Zero Trust. It's a transport. It's a way for them to get from here to there, from A to B. But I don't trust it. Don mentioned, virtualized images or virtualized desktops, where you can sandbox. Now, it can't, if the computer is compromised, let's say they're using their home device, and I can sandbox that image on that device, then, okay, that device is compromised, but it can't access that sandbox. So that's a good thing. There's some other things as well, but there's a risk level. Like I said before, there's a risk level. Okay, it's coming from an unmanaged network. Okay, there's a level of risk, but how are they authenticating? Are they using a fully managed device? Are they VPNing? All right, so that's might even the risk out a little. Okay, now I may not let them Based on that, I may not let them download and print, but I'll let them read and access their email and read. I may not let them get to the HR application, that has all their PII, but I may let them get to the cafeteria schedule. So they can know when roast beef is being served in the cafeteria when they come back to work, so they can decide what day they want to come into the office rather than telework kind of thing. So I think, there's those factors I think you need to weigh, but it's an untrusted network. One of the things in the executive order is encrypting your data. And so that's something that you need to be able to do, is encrypt your data, data at rest, data in motion. Because when we talk about zero trust, the end game is protecting data. That's what it all is boiling down to, is my data protected at the end of the day. So that's what you got to be able to follow the data. And then I could get into, all right, now you got a baseline. Where's your data going? Where does it reside? Is it categorized correctly and everything? But that's what it comes down to, is all the factors that make up, is my data protected, and am I going to allow for these people or these other systems to access it securely or not?
Sure. Got it. And let's hope it's vegan roast beef. And Don, you must have that same issue. And also, can the TIC 3.0 architecture that's coming out to account for distributed computing in this manner help with that issue at all with the home?
It does, Tom. And I did want to mention that it is a challenge with our examiners in the field that they do have not so robust connection to the internet, whether it's in their home or in some other location. We try to make sure that they perform their work in their home. So we do have standardized policy within the patent examiner corps where they must have a certain level of connection in order to do their work, because our patent examiners, as you know, they have to access data and they have to do some pretty technical work and use applications that aren't necessarily, they need to have the right amount of bandwidth, and they don't need any issues with accessing the application and the data they need to do to perform their work. So we do have standards set for them with the telework agreements for patent examiners that you must have this level of bandwidth to perform remote or teleworking. So we address it in that manner. We do, frown upon obviously doing any type of sensitive work involving intellectual property from Starbucks or anywhere else. So we have policy that addresses that. So in instance, yeah, they are remote, they are a mobile workforce, but we have policies in place to ensure the appropriate bandwidth is there. And shifting to TIC 3.0, so yeah, it's no longer can we have the hairpin. There's been really strict internal and external boundary with the traditional model, and now we're beginning to utilize cloud services, and we know that our remote workers need access to all our agency resources. Of course, that impacts the attack surface, right? So now, we're protected by our on-premise protections and our boundary defenses, and now we're allowing access to cloud without going through our on-premise infrastructure. So what's great about TIC 3.0, I think it'll allow a distributed environment where you can have distributed enforcement in different locations along the path. And that really hopefully will provide a commensurate level of protection. So for us, we're looking forward to our service provider for our connection to the internet, which is through NOAA, to come up with their TIC 3.0 approach, the services they'll provide to us, the governance framework, which we will then fall underneath that capability. Internally, we will do the zero trust architecture approach to ensure if someone gets inside, they can't move across the environment.
And a good example of using a shared service rather than reinventing the wheel for yourself also, because it's a fellow Commerce Department component. And if they're already doing it, why not? VJ, the cloud and TIC 3.0, these are all things that you have looked at GAO as kind of point challenges. Do you look at it in a holistic way as securing that user in that home for that federal crucial work?
Yeah, of course, they're all pieces of the puzzle. One thing I think, I wonder if somebody at Starbucks' ears are burning because the number of times we're mentioning them. But I do think we have to also, we're primarily talking about technical solutions, but we also have to talk about user training and behavior as well. I mean, you can never count on the users to do the right thing 100% of the time, but at least you need to make sure they know what the right thing is to do. So when you talk about using high-risk networks like shared Wi-Fi and so on, emphasizing that that's really to be discouraged or prohibited depending on what you're doing, not just because of the Wi-Fi connection, but from a physical security perspective. Who is sitting there, who's looking over your shoulder? What if you accidentally leave something when you get up, right? So it's a mix of the technical controls and the user controls. And then to get back to your point, you're looking at the controls on the devices, the monitoring on the cloud connections, and kind of pulling all the pieces together.
Yeah, when you think about it, these devices are so integrated into people's lives. I mean, I get my coffee at another well-known chain, and they scan a barcode on your device to make sure you get registered for the points and so forth. And I never thought about it, but that could be a data exfiltration mechanism, because you really don't know what's going on behind that app that is barcode.
Sure, and that's why some of the technical solutions we talked about, when people do bring their own device, and you may have agency data on there, making sure that it's sandboxed, and then that the agency has the ability to kind of monitor that, some of their parameters on that device and flag anything that seems risky.
All right, and one other note on that, by the way, in our own local ball team here in Washington, you can't even buy a beer or a hot dog without using your mobile device and scanning and logging on and so on. So, the possibilities really do multiply. And Matthew, what about the cloud, which is what we're really talking about? All these things are cloud types of applications, and agencies themselves are doing more deployment in the cloud. And that is another pathway, another possible risk matter. So how do mobile devices, cloud, data centers, can you wrap it all up for us?
I appreciate the question. And the move to the cloud makes a ton of sense in so many different ways, right? You have the ability to standardize services, use a known trusted provider that's received some level of authorization by the government and assessors. You have the ability to provide greater access to services and resources through cloud connectivity. But there are other use cases too that require an on-prem solution still. Don had a great use case earlier when he talked about protecting intellectual property and sensitive data. So I think a hybrid approach is probably going to be in practice for a very long time, but it certainly makes sense to move to the cloud where it's most practical to do so. As we talk about cloud services and accessibility to resources, I think the point that was made earlier about being able to do individual policy management on devices based on the situation is really important part of this. A person that's working from a local coffee shop and connecting to those services through a government issued and managed device is a very different risk decision than somebody connecting through their phone on their home network, or maybe their phone from a corporate Wi-Fi that's provided. So there are so many decisions that need to be made in real time in order to not hinder user performance or in order to maintain productivity for the workforce. So as we bring new and different devices online, being able to quickly assess those devices and push individual policies that are situational, I think is going to be critical to really see full success in the cloud.
So then therefore device selection, whether BYOD for allowance or issuance by the government, then Nick Ward, would become a function of whether the devices are compatible with those strictures that Matthew just outlined.
Yeah. So, I mean, looking at a couple different aspects of that, the user experience, of course, is important, and not just because we want things to work really well for our users, but one thing I've learned in 20 plus years of cybersecurity is users find a way to do their job. And so if that's downloading super risky apps because we don't have something that helps them do their job, they're going to do that. So we have to find ways to make these devices, pick devices that users like and will use and won't find ways around, and that we can actually apply these best security practices too. Sometimes that means looking at something that feels a little bit riskier, but we have to do that sometimes, because if we don't, the users will pick an even worse way. So that's a good point when we think about how users are using applications, and that whether that be on their device or within the cloud.
And in the final 15 seconds we have for you, just I guess confirm one of the important things we have to do here too is also to make sure users have some involvement in planning this regime for security and device issuance?
Absolutely. If we don't, it's a recipe for failure, and we're going to have worse data breaches and really worse security if we don't include them in our decision making on how we do security.
All right, great discussion. I want to thank all of my guests today. Nick Ward is the Chief Information Security Officer at the Department of Justice. Jerry Caron III is the Chief Information Officer and Assistant Inspector General for Information Technology in the Office of the Inspector General at Health and Human Services. Don Watson is the Chief Information Security Officer for the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Vijay D'Souza, Director of Information Technology and Cybersecurity Issues at the Government Accountability Office, and Matthew Marsden, VP and Technical Account Management Lead for Federal at Tanium. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. You've been listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Tanium.